Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. Sources say we may be seeing a federal election next month. We will explain when the writ may be dropped. Alberta's NDP blasted the UCP, saying more mental health support is needed for our farmers during these tough times of drought. And we hear from our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson, who explains why Alberta's energy minister has been calling out the Biden administration.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Voters may be going to the polls for a federal election on September the 20th. Sources say Prime Minister Justin Trudeau will visit Rideau Hall on Sunday to ask the Governor General to have Parliament dissolved. Those sources say the PM will announce a 36-day campaign, which is the minimum campaign length permitted by law, meaning voting day would be Monday, September the 20th. Opposition leaders Aaron O'Toole and Jagmeet Singh are already criticizing Trudeau for launching an election while COVID-19 continues to circulate and with many parts of the country burning with wildfires. Singh said an early election call would be selfish. Jagmeet Singh summed up his platform in 3 words: tax the rich. He also says the government needs to invest more in health care.
Tax the ultra-rich to invest in people. That's our plan. And really, no other party is willing to say those words. The things that we called for in 2019 have only become more and more important. Healthcare has always been an important thing for people. This pandemic has exposed the problems in our healthcare system, has exposed that we were not prepared for a pandemic, and it showed that there's been a massive gap in the investments we need to make sure healthcare is there for people when they need it. We know that pharmacare is something we campaigned on. We know that people need to have access to medication. That only became worse in the pandemic. People lost their jobs, many people lost their benefits, and it shouldn't be this gamble that if you've got the right job at the right benefit, you get your medication covered, but if you don't, then you're left out.
A Lethbridge City Council candidate who also owns a Star Wars-themed restaurant is facing accusations of sexual harassment of minors. BCN's Naveen Day joins me now in studio with more. Nav, what have you found out so far?
Well, Hal, Bradley Whalen, who owns Coco Vanilla Galactic Cantina, is coming under fire after a post on Facebook accusing him of making unwanted advances towards underage girls has gone viral. Since his posting Wednesday afternoon, it has been shared over 80 times and received hundreds of comments. The posts and comments alleged Whalen had sent, quote, a gross amount of sexual texts and comments towards his female staff, job applicants, and other underage girls, some of who were only 15 years of age. Whalen did respond on the message thread saying, quote, this information is because 2 former employees were out of work for a few weeks and now they're upset because the decision was made to not bring them back for related reasons to this slander. I reached out to Whalen for an interview request, but he declined to comment. He did say, however, there is no evidence to suggest a crime has been committed and I'm already getting death threats in regards to these issues. I also reached out to Lethbridge Police, but they were unable to respond to my inquiry in time for our newscast. As of Thursday afternoon, Whalen is still listed on the City of Lethbridge website as a candidate who is running for a seat on City Council. He says he has yet to make a decision whether he will continue running. This is a developing story, and we will have more information when it becomes available. Back to you, Hal.
Lethbridge City Council candidate Jen Prosser announced her plans to invest in a stronger and safer city with the creation of the City of Lethbridge Future Fund. She says if she's elected, she will introduce the fund that will focus on investing in projects that promote local jobs and businesses while addressing climate change.
The Lethbridge Future Fund, the City of Lethbridge Future Fund, came out of a lot of these discussions I've had with folks who have been working on the front lines, Indigenous water and land protectors, conservationists, environmental activists, as well as business owners and builders, and folks who do planning for different governments, talking about ways that we can act immediately to support folks in reducing their carbon emissions, but also to support folks in the reality of climate crisis, which is very, very much on us right now.
The NDP is calling on the Alberta government to implement a 24-hour mental health crisis support hotline for farmers all across the province. The NDP is also renewing their proposal for the UCP to provide 5 insured mental health sessions for Albertans. NDP agriculture critic Heather Sweet was in Lethbridge discussing how she's been talking with farmers about their own mental health and how the current heat wave has really affected them.
So the 24/7 line needs to be specific to agriculture. It's so that our producers, our farmers and ranchers are able to speak to someone who understands the stress of farming and ranching. It's a different industry, and there's different demands. And as we see today, dealing with drought is a different conversation than if you were talking about something different. And so we want to make sure that farmers and ranchers have access to a mental health specialist that understands farming and ranching.
I give so much credit to people that have spoken out about mental health in agriculture because it's tough. It's tough to be that person that sticks their neck out and acknowledges that there's a problem. So I give them a ton of credit, and I'm a lagger. I follow in their footsteps, and I hope to support them and support their message. But I do believe if those tools are there and those resources available, they will be utilized. And I think that farmers are some of the best monkey see, monkey do people, and that, well, that worked for them. Why can't that work for me?
Now, this comes off the heels of the Rural Municipalities Association passing a resolution in the spring of 2019 to call on the UCP to form an Ag Mental Health Crisis Hotline. We also reached out to Agriculture and Forestry Minister Devin Dreeshen for comment, but have yet to hear back. Alberta reported 550 new cases of COVID-19 on Thursday, the largest single-day increase since late May. Our province currently has the highest active case count in the country at 4,101. Close to 44% of the active cases are in the Calgary zone, followed by 22% in the Edmonton zone. Now here in the South zone, there are 568 active cases, including 322 in Medicine Hat and 84 in Lethbridge. The province has faced some criticism over its decision to shut down contact tracing, testing, and isolation requirements by August 16th. Dr. Dina Henshaw says the science for doing so is sound, but our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson says her critics disagree.
You have doctors' associations writing about it. You had a group of people just the other day requesting the federal government to sort of step in and directly fund the education sector to sort of sidestep some of the issues we just talked about. So the criticism is coming from all over, fast and furious, I would say. And Jason Kenney pointing out that, of course, there is debate on how Alberta ought to approach these things, but falling back again on what you just mentioned, that Dina Hinshaw says the science supports this approach. So
Tyler Dawson will also explain why Alberta's Energy Minister Sonia Savage is saying the Biden administration smacks of hypocrisy. He'll have all the details coming up after business news. A Manitoba man has begun a long and arduous bike trek from Wawaniisa, Manitoba to Lethbridge, Alberta. The bike ride is more than 1,000 kilometers. And as Micah Quinn explains, he's doing it all for a great cause.
From August 11th to the 20th, Rob Naderloff is cycling to raise funds and awareness for Wounded Warriors Canada. The money will go towards the PTSD support dog program for veterans or first responders who have the disorder.
It's like a companion for the guy who doesn't have a good support system at home, or he needs a little bit extra support system from something else other than his family members that he has. And it's quite expensive to raise, get support dogs.
Naderloff has been in the military for the past 22 years now, completing 3 tours, with 2 in Afghanistan. He said he's seen the mental health of his own friends go downhill after coming home from a tour.
So that was a big factor for me to do something like this, because they didn't have a great support system.
The military man will be biking 100 to 120 kilometers per day on the expedition, and the goal for the fundraiser is $5,000, which Naderloff has already surpassed.
Like, this is amazing. I didn't even think we'd get $2,000.
You can keep up with Naderloff's journey by visiting his Facebook page, The Prairie Thousand, and he's got a strong message for those who might be looking to embark on a similar journey like his as well.
To let me know, and I'll join them for the next one, or they can join me for the next one. Honestly, that'd be great.
For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
A Lethbridge athlete is about to make her Paralympic debut in Tokyo next week. Peyton Vare was born in Cardston, but lives in Lethbridge and will be joining Team Canada's sitting volleyball roster. Vare grew up playing soccer, but in 2018 she experienced a lawnmower accident that resulted in the amputation of her left leg below her knee. Vare says right after her accident, she was introduced to the sport and is excited to be competing in her first Paralympic Games.
Right off the bat in the hospital, I had a couple girls from the team come and talk to me about the sport, explain to me what exactly it was, and just invited me basically to come try it out. And that's exactly what I did. I reached out to the coach, and before I knew it, they welcomed me onto the team, and I've been training with them for the last 2.5 years. I was honestly so excited. I was a little in shock that I had made it, but I was so honored that I get to represent such a beautiful country and wear the maple leaf on my back when I play. It's such an honor to be a Canadian athlete, and I'm so excited to be able to represent us the best I can. And I can't wait to go compete. It's going to be my first games. I'm so excited. This is the highest level that I could ever compete at. So it's going to be hard, but I'm excited to feel the pressure and also put the pressure on for other countries.
Now, to qualify for Tokyo, Ver and her teammates went 6-0 in a 2020 tournament in Halifax, Nova Scotia. The Paralympic Games begin on August the 18th. Electrical boxes around Galt Gardens here in Lethbridge have been given a makeover courtesy of some local artists. It's all in an effort to spruce up the downtown core while giving local artists a place to showcase their work. Carson Marsouk has the details on this cool new pilot project.
A new pilot project to wrap electrical boxes with vinyl wrap downtown, designed by local artists, has come to life thanks to a partnership between the Allied Arts Council, Public Art Committee, and the City of Lethbridge. Executive Director of the Allied Arts Council, Suzanne Lind, says the project has received a lot of positive feedback so far.
As soon as these boxes go up on social media, the hits are just astounding. Some of the highest hits we've ever had on the public art.
A call to local artists went out in the spring of 2020, which brought in 34 submissions, with the top 6 being chosen, including Leela Armstrong, who designed the backyard wilderness box on the corner of 1st Ave and 7th Street South. She says her design was inspired by urban wildlife that is found in and around Lethbridge.
Promoting a better understanding of urban wildlife. So I want it to feature animals that are found within city limits and have people see the work and reconsider their relationship to those animals.
Aside from redesigning the boxes, Armstrong says it's a way to spark up a conversation.
You can come down to this location and you can walk around and you can see the artwork, and instead of there just being this, plain old utility box, there's something that you get to look at and think about and have a discussion with the people you're with.
One of the biggest challenges the group faced throughout the project was the famous Lethbridge wind. The council says the vinyl wrap not only beautifies the electrical boxes, but also serves as a way to shield them from the elements, leading to a longer lifespan. For Bridge City News, I'm Carson Marsouk.
The Central Okanagan Emergency Center says hot weather and wind expected over the next couple of days could spur more wildfire activity in BC. It says that means thousands of people currently on evacuation alert should be ready to leave their properties on short notice. Boaters are also asked to avoid areas like Okanagan Lake, where water bombers have been picking up water to battle the blazes. The White Rock Lake wildfire burning by Kamloops is estimated to cover 565 square kilometers. BC's top doctor says residents need to check on one another during the upcoming heat wave. Dr. Bonnie Henry says the heat, combined with lingering wildfire smoke, can hit people's health pretty hard. More than 500 people have reportedly died as a result of a heat wave last month.
We are dealing with challenges, as I don't need to say, on many fronts right now, both smoke and hazards from wildfires combined with unusual heat and the continuing challenges we have with this pandemic. As you know, Environment Canada has issued another heat warning for the coming days, starting today and lasting as long as through Sunday. This is particularly important in the central and southern Okanagan, the lower mainland, and the southern Vancouver Island areas, where we see forecast temperatures are rising in all of those areas. It is not anticipated to reach the same levels that we experienced earlier in late June, early July this year. Many people here are not acclimatized to this type of temperature, particularly when it doesn't cool down at night. We need to remind people that high indoor temperatures can be particularly dangerous for older adults, for those with chronic health conditions, and especially for susceptible people with health conditions who are living alone.
The judge in the extradition case of Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou says she has questions about records of the case the U.S. submitted as proof that Meng should be sent south to face charges. BC Supreme Court Justice Heather Holmes says she wants to know what is alleged by American prosecutors and if any business or just dollar clearing that Huawei did with Iran would violate U.S. sanctions. Meng is accused of fraud on allegations she did not tell a major bank that Huawei controlled a telecom company doing business in Iran, putting the bank at risk of violating the sanctions. The extradition hearing is taking place as China sentences one Canadian to the death penalty and another to 11 years in jail in what experts have said is in retaliation for Meng's arrest. The state of Florida has seen an uptick of COVID-19 in children at the Joe DiMaggio Children's Hospital. A chief medical officer says certain antibody therapy has been quite effective in reducing the severity of the illness.
Over the last several weeks, we have seen an enormous increase in the number of positive patients for COVID-19. Most of these children are coming to the emergency department, and most of them are not sick enough to come into the hospital. However, those that are admitted are sicker than what we've seen before, and many of them are requiring care in our intensive care units.
We've been seeing about double our normal summer volume with overall patients, but I think for us the most striking thing is how the increase in the families that are coming in that are positive. Not just the one patient, but the parents are positive, all the siblings are positive.
Meanwhile, in the state of California, it'll become the first in the United States to require all public and private school teachers and staff to get vaccinated against COVID-19 or undergo weekly testing. California Governor Gavin Newsom with the announcement.
The state of California, trying to lead by example, also asserted that we need to do more and do better by becoming the first state in the country to require vaccine mandate, or at least verification, and or a testing requirement. We're now following up today to align our school strategy to the state strategy and become the first state in the country to require that all of our staff, not just teachers, credentialed staff, paraeducators, custodial staff, the bus drivers, folks that are critical to supporting the entire school ecosystem, also submit a verification of vaccination and or submit to weekly testing.
Not only have we been experiencing record hot temperatures in southwestern Alberta, but a major heat wave is being forecast for the Pacific Northwest in the United States, with temperatures there expected to be near 40 degrees Celsius in Portland, Oregon.
So we are at the Arbor Lodge Cooling Center. So Multnomah County has put together this cooling center for the heat crisis, the heat wave that's coming. We have lots of snacks, and we have lots of water. We have mats for folks to lie down on, chairs. It's air conditioned, just a place for folks to get out of the heat and rest.
It was just too much. It was breathtaking, takes your breath away. And I just biked from Lombard and Interstate to here, and it was just, I was out of breath. It was too much. It feels way better in here.
Seems like it's hot just about everywhere across North America right now. And if you live in southwestern Alberta, make sure you load up on lots of sunscreen and stay well hydrated. The hot temperatures we've been experiencing here will remain for a few more days. Full weather details are coming up. It was another beautiful day in our city, just a few clouds and not too hot, but that's about to change. Tonight, clearing with a low near 7. Friday, mainly sunny with a high expected near 32. Saturday, blue sky, sunshine, and a high of 35. Pretty much the same picture for Sunday. Monday, a low pressure system returns, bringing clouds and rain and a high of only 25. Tuesday, more rain developing with the temperature dropping down to 20. Wednesday, the rain will taper off and we should see a high near 23. Checking the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 26 degrees and an average low of 11. The highest temperature in the state was recorded in 1940 at 37 degrees, and the record low was +2 in 1966. Sunrise was at 6:18, sunset at 8:55. Looking at Friday's national forecast now, Victoria had a heat warning today, pretty much the same picture on Friday with a high expected near 30. Just a few clouds at 28 is on tap for Vancouver. Sunshine at 29 for Calgary. Sunny as well and 31 degrees for Edmonton. Partly cloudy and 25 for Regina on Friday. A few clouds at 27 for Saskatoon. Clearing at 23 degrees in Winnipeg on Friday. Expect a thunder shower and 28 degrees for Toronto. Rain at 29 for Ottawa. A mixture of sun and cloud and 30 degrees for Montreal. In Atlantic Canada, it should be mainly overcast and 31 in Fredericton, New Brunswick. Lots of cloud cover and 30 degrees in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Just a few clouds and 29 in Charlottetown, PEI. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, expect a mainly cloudy day with a high near 25 degrees.
Today's weather is brought to you, rain or shine, by the Gym in the North. Top-notch equipment and customized classes in Lethbridge's North End.
If Air Canada only uses part of its $5.9 billion federal aid package, The parliamentary budget officer says Ottawa could make around $177 million over the next decade. That is because the deal included the government take a 6% stake in the airline. Among other things, the aid package specified that Air Canada had to offer refunds to passengers whose flights were cancelled due to COVID-19. Canadian Tire blew past expectations for second quarter results as its revenue increased more than 20% from a year earlier. The retailer has reported a profit of $223.6 million. That compared to a loss of $20 million in the same quarter last year. Normalized earnings came in at $3.72 per share, while revenue for the quarter increased to $3.92 billion. Analysts had expected an adjusted profit of $2.88 per share and $3.85 billion in revenue. Cineplex says its losses widened to $103.7 million in the second quarter. That compares with a loss of $98.9 million from a year earlier. Revenue, however, nearly tripled to $64.9 million as it was able to open more theaters as provinces began to reduce mandatory closures and ease capacity restrictions. Company officials say all of Cineplex's theaters and entertainment venues were open as of July 17th. Box office revenue totaled $12.5 million in the quarter, compared with a nominal amount a year ago at the start of the pandemic. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 33 points on the day to 20,521. The Dow was up 14 points to 35,500. The S&P 500 was up 13 points to 4461, and the Nasdaq was up 51 points on the day to 14,816. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down 16 cents to 69.09 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 13 cents to 3.93 US. Gold was down 21 cents to 17.5269 US an ounce, and silver was up a cent to 23.19 US an ounce. Wheat is at $425 per metric ton. Barley's also at $425. Canola's at $8.83, and corn is at $457 per metric ton. Live cattle were up 20 cents to $123.15. Feeder cattle were down 8 cents to $158.70, and lean hogs were up 50 cents to $110.13. The Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours to 79.84 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, voters can expect to go to the polls for a federal election on September the 20th. Sources say Prime Minister Justin Trudeau will visit Rideau Hall on Sunday to ask the Governor-General to have Parliament be dissolved. Those sources say the Prime Minister will announce a 36-day campaign, which is the minimum campaign length permitted by law, meaning voting day would be Monday, September the 20th. Alberta's Energy Minister Sonia Savage says the Biden administration smacks of hypocrisy. Our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson will explain why shortly. But first, here's a look what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. The Lethbridge Folk Festival is taking place Saturday, August 14th at Legacy Regional Park's Belvedere Amphitheater from 1 to 7 p.m. Enjoy a day of free, family-friendly entertainment, live music, delicious food truck offerings, and more. The festival will feature folk, roots, and blues music performed by local bands, Celtic Roots, the Steve Keenan Band, the Junkman's Choir, plus other musical artists, Scott Cook, May Davis, and the Traveling Mabels will be performing. For details, visit lethbridgefolkclub.com. The Evangelical Free Church of Lethbridge is hosting an event to remember on September 8th and 9th from noon to 8 p.m. each day. Pandemic measures impacted funerals and memorials, leaving many to grieve alone. This event is to provide an opportunity for all those who have lost a loved one during the past 18 months to remember and honor them. Members of the community are welcome to submit a photo and details about their loved one, and a poster will be designed and displayed for public viewing at the church. There will not be a scheduled program, simply an opportunity to walk through the room, honoring and recognizing those who have passed away since the beginning of March 2020. There's no charge to participate or attend this event. For more information, call Monica at 403-329-3125, extension 251. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
Alberta's Energy Minister Sonia Savage says the Biden administration is now pleading with OPEC to increase oil production, smacks of hypocrisy. To discuss this in more detail is our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson, joining me from Edmonton. Tyler, Minister Savage says it's hypocritical for the Americans, especially after Joe Biden canceled Keystone XL.
Yeah, and of course, also in the context of the latest Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report that came out this week, this is the situation basically. The US government is concerned about high fuel prices in the United States, and they are saying that part of the reason why fuel prices are so high is not enough supply. So they're asking OPEC to increase supply to bring down prices for fuel. Now, of course, Sonia Savage pointing out that were the Keystone XL pipeline up and running, that would be like 1 million barrels a day that would be coming into the United States, going to refineries, being processed. That would, sort of a homegrown solution to this issue. So yeah, a bit of a karma, maybe, shall we say, for the United States right now when it comes to the Keystone XL thing and apparently high fuel prices for Americans.
Yeah, it's all about supply and demand. I mean, we've got the supply, the demand is there. Let's try and put two and two together, shall we? I mean, we're your, northern neighbors here. Let's give you a little bit of oil. Now, Tyler, it'll soon be back to school. I hate saying those three words. A lot of kids are going to turn us off because of that. But it's back to school for thousands of students across the province. Now, many are concerned about the potential of COVID and the Delta variant in the classrooms. Now, kids, of course, not able to get the vaccine yet. And in some school districts, parents must choose if they're actually going to send their kids back to school.
So yeah, that's going to be a choice that lots of parents are having to make this year. Are their kids going to stay at home and try and continue to do online learning, or are they going to be back in the classroom? And the deadline in some places to make those decisions is coming up quick. And the province has not really released like a full plan about what they're going to do in schools when things go back. So there has been some movement in Catholic school boards in Edmonton, I think, that have basically said, look, we're gonna do what we did last year. We're gonna do social distancing. Kids are gonna wear masks. That's how we're gonna tackle it. But it seems like there is a lot of concern and worry among parents in the province right now. And of course, the New Democrats hammering the UCP government for this, for not coming out with a plan for, in the words of the NDP, not doing enough to keep kids safe. So a really contentious situation, shall we say, even though the worst of the pandemic appears to have abated at this point.
Tyler, colleges and universities are also struggling about how to approach the fall here in Alberta.
That's right. So obviously college and university students will, by and large, have been eligible for their vaccinations. But there's this question about whether or not they're going to be asking people if they're vaccinated to return to campus, whether or not there's going to be masks and things like that to go to class or participate in other activities on campus. And universities across the country are approaching this in a variety of different ways. You have some Ontario universities, for example, saying that people are going to need to be vaccinated to go to class. So far, the two big universities in Alberta, the University of Alberta in Edmonton and U of C in Calgary, don't seem to be going down that road. But nevertheless, the people I know who work in the university sector or who are going to university, that's an issue that's sort of top of mind because, as we all know by this point, the vaccine's pretty good, but it's not 100% effective. And there's still some risk, of course, to congregating around lots of other people.
Now, the province is facing some more criticism over COVID, in particular its decision to shut down contact tracing, testing, and isolation requirements by, I believe, August the 16th. Tyler, Dr. Dean Hinshaw says the science is sound for doing so, but many of her critics disagree.
Yeah, it's been quite a noisy round of criticism, I would say, and coming from the New Democrats, of course, but also critics in the healthcare sector. You have doctors' associations writing about it. You had a group of people just the other day requesting the federal government to sort of step in and directly fund the education sector to sort of sidestep some of the issues we just talked about. So the criticism is coming from all over. Fast and furious, I would say. And Jason Kenney pointing out that, of course, there is debate on how Alberta ought to approach these things, but falling back again on what you just mentioned, that Dina Hinshaw says the science supports this approach. So I'm no epidemiologist, Hal, so I'm gonna think just cross my fingers for the time being and hope that Dr. Hinshaw has it right.
And didn't even our federal health minister, Patty Hydew, and Premier Jason Kenney get into a bit as well in regards to us dropping the contact tracing and so forth?
Yes, I believe they did. I can't remember the specifics of it, but the contact tracing thing has come up a number of times, and that's sort of the one that actually is a little bit confusing to me personally. I mean, especially when you look at something like long-term care homes and continuing care where people are going to be visiting and stuff. It seems like but I mean, on the other hand, perhaps the contact tracing system has been up and down throughout the pandemic, so maybe the loss of it isn't that great.
Now, a couple of questions will be added to the municipal election ballot this October. One is daylight savings time, and the other is on equalization. Tyler, what would an equalization referendum actually mean? And would the Trudeau Liberals even care about what we have to say on the issue?
Exactly. So the update on this file is that we actually now know the wording of it, the specific question that's going to be asked on the ballot. On the daylight savings question, it's pretty simple. Should we stay on summertime for the year? So I guess that means we wouldn't do the fallback thing.
Right.
On equalization, it's about whether or not the provision in the Constitution regarding equalization should be removed. And as you say, the big open question here is what that's going to mean should that referendum pass. The United Conservative government being quite adamant so far that if this passes, this means that the Prime Minister ought to sit down with Alberta and discuss this. Of course, any constitutional amendment requires all sorts of other things to happen involving other premiers and whatnot. But the government is saying that, look, if this passes, they have to talk to us about it. Critics, of course, saying that's that's not the case and they don't need to do anything. So, regardless of what happens with that, I certainly think that that's going to be an issue we're going to continue hearing about, especially if it passes once the Alberta government knows it has this mandate or not, and then is going to be pushing forward to try and get some action from the federal government and other provinces on that file.
Well, the reason I'm thinking about, will the Liberals even care? I mean, look what happened with the recent Senate appointments. We were supposed to be electing ours here. This is who our choices are. Mr. Prime Minister, please choose from these. Like, no, forget it, I got my own person. Didn't he pick like the Banff mayor as one of the appointees?
Yes, he did. The Banff mayor just got appointed, and then the Banff Town Council had to sort of scramble to find a new mayor. And that does remind me that I should probably mention that Senator Doug Black, who was actually an elected senator, announced his retirement on Wednesday from a couple decades, I think, on the Senate, saying that it's time for a new voice to represent Alberta. Senator Black, who incidentally is sort of from that area, from the Calgary, Banff, Canmore kind of corridor there.
Now let's circle back to the healthcare industry for just a moment here, Tyler. Nurses across the province were out in full force at hospitals and healthcare centres, including right here in Lethbridge, picketing the UCP's 3% wage reduction plus the loss of benefits. Now you say this issue has become a major political football.
I would say so. It's one of those issues that very neatly divides the United Conservatives and the New Democrats. There's lots of issues out there that we've talked about, coal mining being one, for example, where there's been some sort of bipartisan agreement back and forth, this and that. On this file, there is none. The New Democrats are behind the unions. The UCP is, standing behind its wage cut. Now, the thing that's of note about Wednesday's protests is that these were not strikes. These were not walkouts or wildcat strikes like we saw some time ago. These were basically educational pickets, handing out pamphlets, talking to people. But as you say, the issue is essentially for the United Nurses of Alberta, which I believe represents around 30,000 nurses. They're facing a 3% wage rollback and then some rollbacks on some other benefits. The UCP is saying that, look, we've got a $93 billion debt level right now. Half of our annual budget is going to public sector compensation. Everyone needs to tighten their belts. The New Democrats on the other side saying that, we're on our way out of a pandemic, that nurses have been the backbone of the government response, the healthcare response, and how dare the government treat them this way. So, there's a long history in Alberta of very, very ugly fights between nurses and the government. And this one is certainly not going anywhere anytime soon.
Well, and the timing has to be suspect. Like you said, we're just coming out of a pandemic. It's like, thank you so much, nurses, for your hard work. By the way, we're going to roll back your wages 3%. So maybe the timing is a little off right now in that regard. Now, the fight over childcare continues, Tyler. Ottawa's inked deals with many provinces except Alberta. The UCP claims the Trudeau Liberals are playing favorites with Quebec by not giving us the same deal.
Yeah, this is a little bit of a tricky one. Basically, what the Alberta government wants is the money with pretty much no strings attached or conditions.
Like Quebec.
Yeah, like Quebec, exactly.
Right.
Now, what the federal government says is that the money set aside is for a certain kind of daycare space. I think non-profit or something like that. Daycare spaces. The Alberta government says that, look, only 14% of Alberta parents use this sort of space, and they would like that money available to go to, say, relatives who are caring for kids, for-profit daycares, and other sort of childcare scenarios that exist. So that's why they want the money with no conditions. Now, the federal government also saying that, look, Quebec has a daycare system already. It already meets all our conditions. That's why there's no strings attached. So again, a debate that's going to continue going on, has become a good political one for Kenney because of the Quebec factor, I would say. And of course, the New Democrats saying, get it done, ink a deal with the federal government. So I'm sure a deal is coming on that. We'll get there eventually, but certainly a little bit of back and forth on what that funding is going to be for that the federal government is handing over.
The province recently announced millions of dollars in funding for farmers who are really struggling during the summer's drought, Tyler. The most recent crop report says about 20% of Alberta crops are in good condition, only 20%. Now, thanks to lack of the moisture and hot temperatures, many farmers have started combining early.
Yeah, and my understanding would be that a lot of that means they're selling their crops for things like animal feed at a lower rate of return. Now, the Alberta government recently announced, I believe it's $132 or $136 million for ranchers and beekeepers. Now, that money is sort of broken down per head of cattle and whatnot. So there's aid available for that sector of the industry, and then there's also a deal that they are working on with the federal government for it's an agri-recovery sort of program, a cost-sharing program basically between the federal government and the Alberta government that's going to be somewhere in the ballpark of $200 million. The details on that, I believe, not finalized yet, but fully expected. I mean, that program exists for this sort of scenario. So at some point, there certainly should be some relief coming for the farmers that have just been hammered by the drought this year.
Yeah, they've been devastated, absolutely. The Kenney government released a report from KPMG into its early responses to the pandemic. From March to October of 2020, it reviewed and offered 5 recommendations to the province. Now, the NDP claims the government did not follow recommendations quickly enough and is calling for an independent review of the province's response to the pandemic. Tell me more.
This is a strange one because we knew this report was coming and the government had promised to release it. And then they said, we've got the report, but we're not going to release it. And journalists love being told they're not going to get something that they expected to. So there's quite a bit of a blowback against the government for that decision. And then late on Friday, they did actually release this report. And as you say, about 5 recommendations, mainly involving flexibility and backfilling of spots in the healthcare system and trying to improve uptake in business supports and things like that. So whether or not, as the NDP said, the government didn't act fast enough on these things, frankly, I think reasonable people can disagree on that. And the KPMG report also suggested that the government continue to consult and evaluate its response as the pandemic went on, because this is a really short period of time. This is March 2020 to October 2020. And obviously a whole heck of a lot happened after that. So the NDP, of course, calling for this independent inquiry, perhaps a judicial inquiry of some sort. Whether or not we'll get what the NDP specifically wants, I don't know. But I do think it's a reasonable request, actually. And I don't think anyone would necessarily disagree with that it would be a good thing to take a step back and look at the entire pandemic response and be able to say, this is what went right, this is what went wrong. So I guess we'll have to see what's going to happen on that. But in the meantime, there was this report from this very small period of time that created perhaps a little bit more controversy, shall we say, than it needed to.
So Tyler, we're a couple of years away from another provincial election. Many in the Conservative base are upset at the Kenney government with a mask mandate, with the way the pandemic was handled, 3 pastors being arrested, the only premier in all of Canada who had pastors arrested. And of course, the NDP is very much against the UCP. So a lot of people are saying they have to rebuild their image within the grassroots here in Alberta. Do you think those 2 years will be enough? And what will it take? Will it be more spending? But then how do you do that when you're trying to rein in spending and get the deficit debt under control?
Well, it's a great question. And, I think the question for the UCP is probably how concerned are they about rebuilding these grassroots? And how concerned are they about trying to pull off some of the economic miracles that they've promised? I think it's an unfortunate calculation, and I think it's one that the federal Conservatives make quite often as well. I think they basically look at, well, I shouldn't say the UCP does do this. There's the possibility that strategists within the UCP will say, look, the discontented grassroots aren't going to vote for anyone else. They're not going to necessarily go vote for the Wild Rose Party or any of the other sort of smaller parties out there. So we're not going to, work that hard to rebuild that part of our base. But certainly where they are going to be concerned is hanging on to some of their seats in the big cities, whether that's in Edmonton, particularly Edmonton probably, and in Calgary. So, for them, I think the strategy is trying to balance keeping the grassroots happy with also trying to keep the cities happy. And on that side of it, I think largely that's going to mean what does the next 2 years look like economically? all speculation on my part, but I think it's a really good question, and I don't envy the guys in the UCP that are going to be making those decisions over the next couple of years.
And one thing we've noticed down here in Lethbridge as well, we're seeing more and more ministers making appearances, coming here, perhaps trying to take that seat away from Lethbridge West MLA Shannon Phillips.
Yeah, exactly.
Our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson, thanks for joining us today from Edmonton.
Always a pleasure, Hal.
We're living in one of the most chaotic times in history. Many are struggling with depression and stress, and perhaps we're losing hope. Today's guest joins us from the Vancouver area to offer some hope to us. Grace Fox is a conference speaker and a member of the First Five writing team for Proverbs 31 Ministries and is the author of Finding Hope in Crisis, Devotions for Calm in Chaos. Welcome to Bridge City News. Grace, so great to have you on today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Now, you start by saying that you've had enough trials in life to make your writing credible. So what have you faced in recent years?
Well, the most life-changing event that happened to me actually was when I was in my early 20s, and I've never been the same. It actually, I think, put me on the trajectory that I'm on. And that was living in Nepal and working with my husband there. We were fairly newly married, but we had our first child was born there, and that was fine. Very different, though, taking him from a mission hospital back to our mud and rock hut with a grass thatch roof with no electricity or running water. And when he was 20 months old, our second child was born at the mission hospital, and she was born with a condition called hydrocephalus, which is too much water on the brain. And when the doctors realized what was going on, they just said, you have to go back to North America on the first available flight, which would actually have been 3 days from then. But when the airlines found out that I'd had a C-section, they said, you're a medical high risk and we don't want you on the plane. But my husband wrapped that baby in a blanket. We gave him a bottle of express breast milk and a diaper bag. He got a ticket for himself and he took that baby home while I was left behind. And I had to stay there for another week, not knowing if I'd see my daughter alive again or not. I remember in that very, very dark moment, just crying out to God and saying, what is it you want me to learn in this? What is this? And he spoke to me by reminding me of that old hymn, Great is Thy Faithfulness. Just reminding me that he wasn't promising me that my daughter would live or what her quality of life would be if she did live, but he reminded me that he would be faithful. And I hung on to that. So the next couple of years were really rough. My daughter did live, but she had about a dozen surgeries, and she had brain surgery, and she had meningitis when she was 11 months old. So it was a rough ride, but God was faithful. And in these times of crises, I've had a few more since then, losing my mobility a few years ago for several months, and just last fall, losing my mom in a very sudden turn of events, other things too in between. But hanging on to that hope that is found in the truth that God is faithful no matter what. He's there with us.
Yeah, what an incredible story you have, Grace. Now, many people are living with a sense of despair and don't know how to pull out of it. So what's worked for you in the past?
So when I find that sense of heaviness just coming in on me, I find that I have to go back to the promises in the scriptures. And sometimes in those crisis times, I know that we can't even remember whether or not we've had the last meal, and it's hard to remember what day of the week it is sometimes. We get so caught up with those concerns that are pressing us at that moment. And so I say, it's good to just find one promise from the word, write it out on a recipe card, and just keep it with you. Again, another thing that I do, a practical thing, is just to put my earbuds in, and I go with my phone, I go for a walk, and I tune into a praise and worship station. So I listen to that music, and even if I can walk 10 minutes or 15 minutes, just whatever I can get in is good, because for one, it's the exercise that works as well, rather than just staying inside in that confined space and stuffy air. Sometimes get out, get a bit of fresh air, get those hormones going with exercise, and listen to the praise and worship music to refocus my thoughts. Because if I'm just focused on the worries, I'm going to go down into a dark place. But if I focus on the one who's in control of those worries, of my situation, then I can pull myself out of it. And so that's, and another one would be to call somebody, because We don't have to go through this alone. The enemy of our soul will try to make us think that nobody else has time and nobody else cares. But when people know that we're in trouble and we make ourselves, we're just honest with other people how we're doing, then we can have somebody pray with us and help carry that burden, because we just can't do that by ourselves.
Yeah. Now, your devotion is called Calm in Chaos, right? So how did that come about? How did you start writing devotionals?
Oh, I started writing devotionals, 15 years ago, and I've had quite a few published, but this one is a little bit different than the others that I've done in that they're very short readings. Some people who've done this say that they take them maybe a minute and a half to read. And I wrote them especially for people facing crisis, because again, like I say, I know what it's like to be in those moments where we're so caught up with the responsibilities or the needs, and it's just hard to recall. It's hard to focus on a long passage of scripture, but a verse is doable. And so I wrote these little scriptures. I've got this little book right here. I wrote them with people like that in mind so that they can focus on one nugget and carry it with them through the day. And almost every one of those readings go back to, who's God in this? Who's God? What's he like? Because if we remember that he's faithful, and if we remember that he's strong and wants to share that strength with us, if we remember that he is a God who is good and wise and sovereign, it just helps us walk through those really difficult times.
Mm-hmm. What do you think is God's solution to worry?
Oh, I love this. I really believe that it's found in Philippians 4, 6, and 7. Let me read you those scriptures. Do not be anxious about anything. That's easier said than done. But in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your request to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. And so I say it's like a mathematical equation. So you've got your elements on one side of the equal sign, and then the summation on the other side of the equal sign. So there's three elements on the left side of that equal sign, and they would be, don't worry about anything. And I say, I remember being a crossing guard when I was in 6th grade, going out there, and I was able to put out my little red paddle that said stop, right? And I'd hold that up towards the cars coming at me. And the power I felt as a 6th grade girl, being able to stop traffic, right?
Yeah.
But we can do the same thing with those worries, to just say, stop it right there. I'm not giving you access to my mind. You're not getting in. So that would be step one. Step two
That's a
on
good
that
visual.
would be, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just hold
I
that
can
paddle
just
up
see
that
you
says
with that.
stop. And the second one then is to pray about everything, no matter how small it seems, just lay it out before the Lord. And the third thing is with thanksgiving. And so we might say, give thanks in the middle of this crisis. Are you kidding me? What do I give thanks for? But it's those things, it's like that God is faithful, that his promises are true, that he will never leave us or forsake us, that he hears our cries for help. Those are the things for which we can be thankful. And so each of those things, when we put them into practice, equal peace. And if any one of those three things are missing, we're not going to end up with peace as the sum. So I believe that's God's solution to worry. Say no to those worries, pray, give thanks, and then we experience peace.
Mm-hmm. So why do you think that it's life's hard places that change us? Is that God's plan all along, do you think, to make us stronger?
We live in a broken world where those hard places come. And God, whether God ordains them or whether he allows them, theologians would even disagree on that. And so I don't spend my time trying to figure out that, whether he allowed this or he ordained it in a hard place. But I believe that he can take those hard places and use them for our good. So we as believers can just roll Romans 8:28 off our tongue, kind of as a pat answer in the hard places, that all things work together for our good. But verse 29, right in the center of it, there's this little nugget that I missed for years and years and years. And right in the middle of it, it says about becoming more like Christ, being conformed to Christ's image. That is what we can look forward to. And that is what God wants to happen when we go through those hard places, is We can become better or we can become bitter. And we want to become bitter, or sorry, whoa, we want to become better. That was a slip of the tongue.
I knew what you meant.
Better by becoming more like Jesus, more patient, more compassionate towards others who are going through suffering as well, more understanding of the needs of others.
Yeah, I think
More-
as humans too, we have that tendency to pull back and withdraw in times of crisis. But this is not helpful, is it? It's actually hurting us.
It is. Here's the visual that I get with that concept. I always think of like a flock of sheep out in the pasture, and there's a little lamb, and the little lamb just moves away from that flock of sheep, maybe just wandering away, eating its grass, and it wanders away. And if there's a coyote or a wolf, some kind of a predator close by, they are going to be watching for the most vulnerable member of that flock. And it's going to be that little lamb that's strayed away from the flock. And we make ourselves vulnerable to the enemy when we wander away from the support that we could have by staying in connection with other people. Because he will come after us. And he will do that by putting the thoughts into our head that no one else cares, everybody's too busy. And if I tell anybody how I'm going through a hard time right now, what will they think of me? They might think that I'm inadequate or weak. I don't want to be considered weak, so I'm not going to talk about this with anybody. But we need to get past that thinking and stay in fellowship with others.
Yeah, I love that visual with the little lamb. It really puts it into perspective, doesn't it? So how do we see beyond our own pain when that's where we're living at the moment?
We have to, for one thing, remember that it's not going to last forever. If we get caught in that present time of a hard place and all we're thinking of is never going to end. Again, that's a thought that the enemy will put into our minds to discourage us. I'm never going to get past this. It's never going to end. It's never going to get better. But remember that in scripture, there are promises too that say, this will not last forever. This will pass. There's a greater glory that lies ahead. And if we remember that this too will pass and the pain will not last forever, we may have to develop a new normal for whatever our circumstances have brought our way. But God will give us the strength to move forward. He's not going to leave us in that hard place of despair. That's just not what he plans for us.
Mm-hmm. Any advice on worrying about the future? A lot of people tend to fret about what's to come, and especially these days when life is just, like you said, it's so chaotic, isn't it?
Yes, it is chaotic and there's so many uncertainties. When is this going to end? We don't know. And we don't know what the new normal is going to look like when things finally settle down. We just don't. And so we can't bank anything on it because it's so uncertain. And so we can get caught up in those thoughts of what if it never happens, that we, what if? But that's where the fear tends to grow. And so when the what ifs come, I like to encourage people to say, even if that worst what if comes to pass, we can hang on to even if that worst thing comes to pass, God's presence is still with us. Even if it goes on for another year, God will never leave us or forsake us. He will be with us every moment of every day.
Right. And in your book, I kind of like this because you remind us that even in the midst of this pandemic, that God never practices social distancing, but still we need that human contact, don't we?
Yeah, and we can look at technology kind of as it can be an addiction for us. It can consume us, but we can harness that and we can use it to our advantage. And so my husband always says, aren't we glad that if we have to go through a pandemic, it's now and not one that was 100 years ago? Because we've got Zoom. This is amazing. We can be 800 or 900 miles away from each other to do an interview like this, but we can connect because of Zoom. And we can connect with our loved ones the same way. We might get zoomed out at some points, but we can, step back, take a little break, and then get back to it again, or Skype or FaceTime, or we have so many options at this point to stay connected. And so if you get fatigued, just pull back a little bit if you need to, but don't pull back forever. Stay in connection with individuals pray with other people. My husband and I meet with a couple almost every Monday evening just to pray. And we've done that for years. So even though we haven't seen each other maybe but once in the last 15 months, we've been able to stay connected and we pray via Zoom. I'm part of a women's Bible study group every Wednesday morning with women all over the States. I'm the only Canadian in that, but we still meet like this. And I've been leading a Zoom women's Bible study every Tuesday evening with women from all over Canada and the States. And it's possible. It's possible. We can do this.
That's amazing. Thanks so much for being with us today, Grace. You have so much wisdom that you've shared. I love it. I love hearing from you.
Thank you. If people want to stay in touch with me, they can connect by going to my website, gracefox.com. They can register to sign up, subscribe free for my weekly devotional blog or even for my monthly free newsletter too.
That's great. Thank you. Grace Fox is the author of Finding Hope in Crisis, Devotions for Calm in Chaos. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.